Hey there, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. My channel mostly revolves around food. We have some garden content and some of our off-grid homestead type content as well, but mostly around food because I have children, 6 children, who are getting to be teenagers and eating a lot of food. So we've got sort of tweens through up to teenagers, and we are going through a lot of food and more than we used to. So part of the way that I saved on groceries and that was by going less often. So I started off going 2 weekly, 4 weekly, 6 weekly. Now we go about every 8 or 9 weeks, and I have to do things a certain way to make sure that by shopping every 8 or 9 weeks, we still have plenty of food at the end of that period and we're still eating a good, well-rounded diet. So part of that I share here. So I do my groceries, which everyone loves to see, and then once I've done them, I give you videos every couple of days that show you how I'm using the food that I bought to make sure that that food is lasting us through those 2 months. I also got a new oven to us. So from before now, all I've used is a Camp Chef stovetop and a barbecue, a hooded barbecue, and I've managed to do everything I needed to do. I've managed to do all my cooking and everything else, but there has been some limitations in how I do things and how I prepare things and how the cooking process has to go because of the lack of an oven. The next step is to, now that we've got the oven, which is sort of a ass about face, but is to get this kitchen. So I'm standing in the kitchen at the moment. Normally I stand out in the garden and you get a view of the bush and stuff, but this time of the month is really busy with all the food prep and I just haven't had a chance and I really need to get this done. So I'm standing in the kitchen. So you can see that the roof is a very much a roof that Jack built, that this whole kitchen space is just pulled together, and we have bought new roofing and stuff to redo this, and it's on its way. So once this is done and we've got the new oven, it's going to change things a whole lot for the easier for me. I'm still going to cook things I'm still going to do all the food prep and everything the same way that I've always done, but it might reduce the time that is required for me to do it. So this video was about sharing one of those meals that my oven, having an oven again, has really made feasible again, something that I couldn't quite do not adequately prior, and it's one of those meals where you basically do everything on the stovetop, but then you just throw it all in the oven to finish its cooking, and you walk away for 30 minutes and you come back and it's done. So this oven is large enough that I could fit 4 half cookie sheet trays in it, which means that I can fit 6 of the cast iron roasting trays that I tend to show a lot and things like that. We're still figuring out a little bits of its idiosyncrasies, but it's made that sort of thing so much easier. So I'm still working on it, but what I wanted to share was, as my start off to all my food prep and planning and preserving for the month, was a video using one of the very first meals that I wanted to make with the new oven. It wasn't quite the first, I think it was the second, but one of the ones that I wanted to make once I was in a position to make it, and show you how I do that kind of a meal to feed a whole lot of people with less hands-on time, because I spend a lot of time in my kitchen, and so some of the ability to make the meals like this really benefits me, especially in winter when it's colder of an evening. So what I did was I filmed this meal basically from start to end, so it only took me like 25-30 minutes to make the whole thing and get it in the oven and then walk away, which is a pretty short amount of time for a meal of the quality and the size that I make. In my opinion, 25-30 minutes is doing really well. So I recorded it from start to finish, all the way through, haven't sped up anything, and I've just had a bit of a chat over the top of it about how the recipe goes, but also discussing what I'm learning about the oven as I go and things like that. So I hope you enjoy it as a start to our July, August food prep, planning and preserving. The next grocery trip won't be until like the 27th, 28th of August, I think it'll be. We do have a hamper coming next week though, and then we'll have one again in the middle before we go on the grocery trip, so we'll have those little bump of some fresh goods there. But we did really well with this shopping haul anyway. I think I got lots of fresh fruit and veg, and I'm working my way through it, which you will see in all the videos to come. So I hope you enjoy this slightly different for me video, showing you this baked risotto and lemon butter chicken. And enjoy. So having the new oven is giving me a lot more options in some of the meals that I can cook. Having the barbecue with the Camp Chef were great, and I managed with just about everything, but there was this limitation to being able to have space in the barbecue to put things in to cook, but also only the 2 burners on the Camp Chef, and they both run really hot. So I've had comments before, people saying, my family must really like burnt food, and whilst we do really like coloured food, the Camp Chef also runs at a really high BTU, and it does and on cast iron it does tend to caramelize things really quick. I like that caramelization. I know not everyone does, but my family doesn't have a problem with it. But having the new oven, the burners on the top of the oven definitely are less powered than the Camp Chef. So there's all these different things to learn about the new oven as I go along, and some of that's going to benefit my cooking and some of it's just going to bug me. So there's going to be some things about the lesser heat on the stovetop that are going to bug me as I'm learning it and using it to cook, and I may cook some things on the Camp Chef by choice. The Camp Chef will be great for canning and stuff still because it's nice and low as well, so getting the jars in and out will be a lot nicer than on top of the new stove. But it is going to give me the ability to cook some of the things that I used to cook when I had a more standard kitchen and have just had to adapt a little bit because I haven't had that available here. So one of those things that I used to do was a lemon butter chicken. Now this was an adapted, it's Lala's lemon chicken is the recipe, and they've adapted it to use in Thermomix, but I've never really used a Thermomix for it because I've always made large batches of it, and I make it how we prefer it to, which is sometimes a little bit different to how a recipe is written. But I like to do it in the oven because that's the best way to have it, but you need to be able to transfer it from a stovetop to an oven, and then if you're having a side with it, then that causes issues if you don't have space in the oven. So all these things are part and parcel of not having had a significant oven range, whatever you want to call it, during the time that we've lived out here, and that's fine. As I said, we've had this dish while I've been out here and we've adapted it as needed, but I really wanted to have a go at doing this standard style meal that I used to do where everything was started on the stovetop, it was tossed in the oven, and then you walked away and it was done. So that's why I'm sharing this whole recipe start to finish in sort of a real-time effect, is to show you how simple some of these style meals can be whilst also being kind of fancy, which is what we like. So I started out by dicing up a whole brown onion, just one big brown onion diced up fairly small. It's going to get really nice and soft while it cooks, so it's not a huge deal, but I like my onion to be fairly small to start with. I'm going to get one of my cast iron pots. I was going to use 2 of these cast iron pots. I do have a green one and a blue one, but I couldn't find the green one at the time, so I just adapted the recipe to fit with just the blue one. I put just over 3 litres of water in the pot. Now, I would use stock if I had it, but I have just used the last jar of stock off the shelf, I think, the other day. So what I did was I used the cubes. So these are the cubes of chicken stock that I pressure cooked the chicken stock, and then I stuck it in the pot and I reduced it by 1/10 of the viscosity of it, the liquid, the capacity of it, and it turned into like a gelatinous sort of a very condensed stock. So all I've done is stuck 2 of these big cubes in with the water, and I'm going to bring that up to a boil because, like any risotto, you like to have your liquid hot. So even if I was making this on a stovetop, you'd heat your stock up because you'd be putting it ladle by ladleful into your rice. So a similar sort of concept. When this goes in the oven, we want all the liquid to already be nice and hot to get that going. Now, I did start it on the burner closest to the bench, but obviously that wasn't going to work when I had other things to do. So I've moved that to a burner off to the side to try and get that up and boiling. And that's also the beauty of this. This is a 6-burner range, so I can easily have 3 burners going without sort of having to cross over the heat of any single one, but I can use all 6 if I need to. A lot of gas usage and that sort of thing, so not going to be something I do all the time. So I put a really generous dollop of ghee into the pan that I'm going to start my chicken in. This chicken is done with, I said it's a lemon butter chicken, so it's normally done with a whole lot of butter. We don't use butter, but ghee is our preferred choice of a sort of a rounded flavoured fat. We use olive oil for a lot of things. We use lard for a lot of things, but this recipe really calls for a buttery, creamy, mellow sort of a fat, and ghee is the one that we use for that sort of a flavour profile. So I put the onion aside while I'm getting this done because I'm waiting for that stock to come to a boil for the risotto, and the onion's going to go in the risotto. And I pulled out a tray of chicken thighs. So part of the meal processes at the moment is that we need to get the items that are going to need to be processed first done. And chicken always has a shorter date than beef or pork or anything like that. So we tend to work on chicken for the first few days and get that sort of sorted. And what I like to do is while I'm processing the chicken, we also have it as meals, so that way I'm not double handling different meats in the same day. So this way we're going to eat chicken now, but we'll also process the rest of it for something else at the same time or within the same day or that sort of thing. So I pulled out enough for a meal for all of us, and I probably should have got 2 fry pans out, to be honest, but I didn't, so we're going to make it work in the one. We're going to season the chicken thighs with some salt and pepper and smoked paprika. I really like a really generous amount of paprika. I really like the flavor profile of paprika, and I know some people don't, but and a bit of garlic powder and that sort of thing, and get it all just really well coated. Get it up off the board if any's gone on the board, and we want it mostly on the top of the thigh, because we're going to create a crust on the top of the thigh. So we want that nice and well dredged in the spices and the seasonings, so that it creates that sort of a crust on the top of it. Once the ghee is really well heated up and melted, and you can see that the oven is still tilting a little bit to that corner there, we're working on that, where we've added some cardboard to the bottom of the oven, but I'd say the cardboard's compressed. We need to get a little bit of ply or something, a nice thin piece of ply to go under that one leg, because that oil is sort of falling to that corner. So all we want to do is we want to get all these thighs in there with that crust side down. We want that whole piece touching the hottest part of the pan, which is how I said I should have probably used more than one pan, but I did manage to get it to fit in the one. So you want to get that spice faced part of the thigh down on the pan, and we're going to just leave it for a while, because to build that crust and to get that nice flavorful dark colored crust on it, we want to just leave it alone on that really hot pan for quite a while, and it cooks through most of that side of the chicken, and then we're going to flip it later. So we're just going to leave it alone so that it gets that really well cooked part of that crust on that chicken. I know I've said that a few times now, haven't I? But it's sort of the right word for it, so Now, because that pan is uneven, as we've discussed, that ghee is sitting sort of unevenly in the pan as well. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to check the underside of them to see how much colour and texture they've got on that side that we want that crust on. And I did end up flipping some that were on that far side of the pan where the butter wasn't pooling as much, because they've had more heat touching them without that liquid, because the liquid kind of makes it stew a little bit and doesn't crisp up as well. So I've left the ones closest to me to sit a little bit longer, and I think I spin the pan around a little bit at 1.2 to try and get that just a little bit more evenly cooking, to get that crust in there. Now I'm using broccoli because we've got to use things like the broccoli and the beans and the cauliflower and things like that we bought in bulk are the things that we need to use quicker than others. So we have half of this will be like, a lot of this broccoli will end up in my freezer, but for the moment we love to eat it fresh, so we try to use as many meals as we can where we can eat it fresh and enjoy it fresh, because that's the benefit of buying it that way, and we enjoy it no matter what, even if it's been frozen afterwards, but at the same time it's always nicer initially. Now I use the stems and the florets of the broccoli. I don't differentiate between the two. They both have great flavor, and if you just want to slice the stems fairly thinly, because they can be a little bit woody if the broccoli is getting a little bit old, so I always just slice them and then sort of julienne them so they're like matchsticks of stir-fry type vegetable. That's what I find works best, and nobody's ever had a problem with it here. It's what I've always done, so they wouldn't know any different. So all I do is cut off the very end, and sometimes if there's a little bit of, like woody bits where a branch has been broken off on the stem and it's looking a little discoloured, I'll snip that bit off too. But generally speaking, I just slice them into thin sort of slices and then julienne them from that, so that they're just a nice narrow piece, and you're not going to have too much in that way of sort of a stringy or woody texture that you would worry about with the stem of broccoli. But it's personal preference there, of course. Once the chicken got to the colour that I wanted it, then I started taking it off the pan, because we're not cooking it all the way through just here. We're just getting that nice colour and the charred sort of a texture on it, getting that little bit of a crust on it, and getting the spices all nice and well cooked off, because they always taste better when they're cooked rather than raw. And then as each piece gets to a point where I'm happy with it, I just pull it off and put it in a bowl so that I can put it back in afterwards, which you'll see later. We're just getting it where we want it first before we pull it off that pan. The stock is up at a simmer now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the onion in there as well, and then I'm also going to add a little bit of ghee, a little bit of cracked pepper, plenty of garlic and the rice. So we've got arborio rice that we're using here, being that it's a risotto, and I'm going to use a full kilo, which is why I would have preferred to have put this between two different pots, because I think it just would have, I could have used a little bit more liquid in it, but I didn't have the room in this one because I was putting the quantity that I was putting in there. And if I had to split it sort of 500 grams and 500 grams, or even I could have cooked a little bit more because there was very minimal leftovers of this, and they would all have eaten it as leftovers. So if I could have done, say, 750 grams in two different pots, I would have had, 1.5 times the amount, but I also would have had a little bit more liquid in each pot for that risotto to end up a little bit more wet. This worked fine. So it was a kilo of it with the sort of 3 and a bit litres of water, but I think that it could have benefited from being in two different pots. I had been preheating the oven. Now, one of the things with this oven is that it has a thermostat, it has a dial to check the temperature of the oven, but it doesn't seem to run particularly accurately. So this oven is a commercial range and it has a pilot light, and what it does is it turns on and off to keep its temperature. So it has, once it gets to like 180, then the gas turns off, and when it drops to like 160, it turns back on till it gets back up to 180, and that kind of thing. So I have found that the thermostat or the dial that you use for the temperature just doesn't seem to be overly accurate. So I have this Bluetooth thermometer, and I can use it to my phone or just with the display screen, and I think I'll buy myself a second one because I normally use this in the smoker in meat and stuff too, and not being able to do that at the moment makes it difficult. I also ordered a couple more of the little clips that hold the thermometer in place in the middle of the oven, because at the moment it's just sort of hanging, which isn't real accurate either, but I'm getting there and figuring out. I think the ambient temperature really impacts the temperature inside the oven as well, and because the oven is outside on my patio and it's winter, then that makes a significant difference compared to like a standard, like this would be installed in a kitchen, and the kitchens are always hot, so it probably runs a lot hotter because of that. So it's a bit of a learning curve, but we're getting there. So I've pulled all the chicken out of that pan, and I've added a great big slug of, this is lemon juice that I had pre-frozen last time I had lemons, and we're going to use that and a whole lot of garlic to get all the fond up off the bottom of the pan, which is all the little cooked brown bits from the chicken and the bits of spices and things like that. I also added a cube of that condensed stock, so I'm going to use that as flavour in there as well. And we're just going to move this around in the pan and pick up all that fond off the bottom, all that little, the little gritty bits of overly cooked spices and bits of chicken and things like that, because that's all flavour. So we're just going to melt the lemon juice and the stock cube in there and get all that off and deglaze the pan using that. And then once it's all dissolved, we'll go on to the next step. Now, I probably left the pan a little long when I took some of the chicken out and didn't take all of it out, and some of that spice is burnt to the bottom, so we're going to have quite a dark coloured sauce here. But I don't mind that. Nothing was burnt. It was just well cooked and well toasted, so it works out fine for me. We're going to add a tin of coconut cream. You can use dairy cream here if that was your choice, but I'm using coconut cream because we don't do dairy in this house in any sort of significant amounts. And I'm going to add that into the pot, and then while the stock and that is still dissolving, we're going to sort of keep it agitated so that cream sort of emulsifies in there and it doesn't split with the lemon juice. Not that I've ever had that happen personally, if I've done, if it's all going in at the temperature that it's going in. But what we're looking to do here is bring it all up to temperature, bring it all up to a simmer at the same time, and then that way it's an emulsified sort of a sauce. And it's going to be a thin sauce. This dish has a very thin sauce, and some people dislike that and they use thickening agents, they use cornstarch or whatever else. But the recipe was originally aimed at the keto sort of people, so they didn't want to add any sort of thickness to it. And realistically, the sauce is delicious, and it depends on what you serve it over as to if it's too much or not, I suppose. But normally we would serve this over veggies or rice or something, and more sauce is not a bad thing. I did add a little bit of vegeta because I just found that the stock cube wasn't quite enough flavour in that sauce, because this is quite a rich sauce, and I wanted to just bump that flavour a little bit, so I just added a little bit of the vegeta in there to help with that sort of umami base of the sauce flavour. And then I'm just going to let it sit until it comes up to a simmer. So we want to get that stock cube dissolved, but we also want to thicken it up just a little bit. And by letting it simmer, that cream is going to thicken up. It's going to reduce a little bit. Some of the water is going to cook off and that sort of thing. I did end up adding a little bit of Grana Padano cheese to this, so I could have used nutritional yeast as an alternative for a dairy-free, but I have found that no one really has any problems with this really hard cheese if I'm just using a small amount for flavour. I don't use very much, and I don't use it in too much stuff. I think that that's a lot of the key here with the kids with issues with the dairy. They've all gotten old enough now that their bodies tolerate it a lot better, so long as I'm not overloading them with it. I also added a handful of thyme there into the sauce as well. You can put whatever sort of a hearty spice that you want in there, but I like thyme with chicken. I find it really tasty, and just that little bit of cheese, and all that is it's a flavour boost. It's not going to give it any thickening or anything else. It's just going to give it a little bump of flavour. I added all the broccoli that I had cut up into the pot, so that I'm going to put that in the bottom in the sauce there, so that it's going to cook in the sauce in the oven. And then I started adding the chicken back in. So all I'm trying to do is get the underside of the chicken, the bit that doesn't have the crust in it, in the sauce, and we're going to leave those crusty, crunchy bits sort of exposed on the top, so that they keep that little bit of crispiness in the oven. And this is where you see that I really probably should have put it in 2 pans, because I could have done twice the amount of broccoli and then had the chicken in there. But I made it fit. It does shrink. The chicken does shrink as it cooks, so even though it looked like it was packed full initially, there is a lot more space, and that sauce is going to bubble and go, and the broccoli is going to reduce in that too as it's cooking in the oven. So I made it work. I made it all fit. Poured all the juice from the chicken over the top as well. Keep on keeping on that flavor to bump the flavor there. And then I put that in the oven as well. I don't cover that one just goes straight in the oven as is, in with the risotto, and they both cook for around about the same amount of time, which is the beauty of this recipe. So they will sit in the oven for about 30-35 minutes, and then I will check the risotto and I will check the internal temperature of the chicken as well after that. This is what the risotto looked like fresh out of the oven, and as you can see, it probably could have done with a little bit more liquid. Normally you would expect it straight out of the oven to be a little more soupy, and then as it sits it ends up thickening up, but it was plenty soft and plenty creamy. It just wasn't quite as liquidy, but that's fine because we're serving it with the lemon butter chicken. So because we've got that lemon butter chicken with it, it doesn't really matter, because that's got all that extra liquidy sauce as well. So I put a big dollop of ghee in there and mixed that through all the rice, just to add that sort of shiny and glossy texture to the risotto, which is what you want in a risotto, is that shiny, glossy, sort of a creamy texture. You could add anything you wanted here. You could add some parmesan to it or any sort of flavoring, but we just wanted it to be sort of a neutral base. That's how we generally make our risottos, is I call them naked risottos. They're a neutral base to be served with whatever flavors we have with them. This is what the chicken looked like once it came out of the oven as well. So you can see that everything's reduced in there, but the sauce is still nice and thin and plenty of it, and the chicken has that sort of a crust on the top with that smoked paprika sort of browned over it, and it's got a little bit of a chewy sort of a crisp texture almost on the top, and it gives it that balance between the softer thigh meat underneath that's been sitting in all that liquid, as well as that more textured chewy top bit. So all I did was served up some risotto, and then we put the chicken thighs on top with a good serving of the broccoli. As I said, if I split it into 2 of these bowls, I could have done far more broccoli and we would have eaten it, but I could have fit it in the oven. I got lazy, realistically. And then I had to go and find, so someone had handed me a spoon, but it was a slotted spoon to get the chicken out. But then I wanted sauce on the risotto too, so I had to go and find a spoon that didn't have holes in it, so that I could pour some of the actual lemon butter sauce from the bottom over the rice as well. So that's going to soup up that risotto a little bit, but also it's a really rich and luscious flavour. Very lemony, which I really like, but if you're not into lemon, then you probably aren't going to like it.